Okay, so as I mentioned in my monthly review for January, I completed my first book and I had a full-on yay moment. I was very happy. But anyway, yes, I completed my first book, The Replacement by Brenna Yovanov. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this book in this video. Sit back, relax, feel free to make some notes and leave some comments if you want to, but for the next half an hour, I'm going to talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, and anything else that may come up somewhere in between. But let's start with the title. It is called The Replacement, and it is by the author Brenna Yovanov. I apologize for the mirror image. I've tried to fix this on my phone. It doesn't work, but I just feel like I should apologize each and every time it happens. At least I'm holding up the book. Okay, let's get into it, shall we? Now, what I didn't like about this book is the fact that it is set in extremely heavy, high humanlandia. The majority of the book, the majority of the book is set in Gentry. Gentry is a human town, okay? And I did not appreciate this at all. The Replacement is referred to as a young adult fantasy novel, but I do not feel that that is enough to explain the type of genre it is. Maybe I'm more the type of reader that needs a much more specific genre to a book, because I would call this book a contemporary genre with a sprinkling of fantasy in little moments, or not really a ton of fantasy until right at the end. And to me, that's not... I just don't like the idea of calling a book a fantasy book when for most of the book it's not a fantasy book. For most of the book this is a contemporary book. Now, if this was a book that... And I'm going to hold up Personal Demons really quickly. This is another book that I read most of in January. I'm reading it with a book club. It will be concluded by the end of February. This book has sprinklings of fantasy throughout the entire novel. So with this one, I understand more why it is a fantasy novel or categorized as a fantasy novel than this one. And if the only reason that we're categorizing this a fantasy novel is because there are fantasy elements at some point in the novel, then that's fine, and I can't go against that because there are, but there's nowhere near enough. So, excuse me. So for me, I would call this a contemporary novel with very low, extremely low elements of fantasy in it. Ultimately, I ended up giving this book a 2-star rating on Goodreads because you cannot give any book a 0.5 rating. I know there are a lot of booktubers out there who don't like that you can't put a 0.5 into a rating on Goodreads, and I am one of them because my official rating of this book is 1.5 stars. I rounded up, and I'll explain why momentarily. But first of all, let's go to the cons of this book because there are many. Why I felt that I needed to subtract 3 stars from the official review, or 3.5 stars, 3 stars from the Goodreads review and 3.5 stars from my official review. First of all, because of the fact that it is centered around so much heavy humanlandia, and I was looking specifically for a book that was going to take me away to a fantasy world from the get-go. And if not from the get-go, then at least from the second chapter onwards, and this book did not deliver on that. As a matter of fact, and I've spoken about this in my reading vlogs, for me, I could have cut out the first 100 pages and just started at page 101 because that's when the fantasy starts to come in. Now, this book has, I'm just going to tell you the page count. It has 375 pages. So 100 pages, it's around about a third to a quarter of the book. I just didn't feel like I needed it. Another con for me with this book is that there are breadcrumbs that are left here or there in those first 100 pages that are tied up towards the end of the book. And then there is I want to call it a ghost. I don't know what what is the proper term, but I'm going to say there's like a ghost or an elephant in the room, metaphorically speaking, an elephant in the room, because we learn that the main character is a replacement, but we have no clue what a replacement is, because anytime it is being discussed, at least within the first 100 pages, it either falls short from actually explaining what it is, or if it's being discussed between two characters, which at one stage Mackie does discuss it with his mum draws the conversation to an end so quickly that all we know is that she too is a replacement, but we still don't know what a replacement actually is. So that's, yeah, definitely another reason why I had to rate it down. The next reason why I rated it down was the enjoyment factor. Now, I'm very happy that before doing this review for you guys, I saw a video from my favorite booktuber talking about how readers rate books and what goes into the process of rating a book, and I really appreciate that, because if I was rating this book purely on enjoyment alone, I probably would have given it a 1 star or a 0.5 of 1 star. There is a whole lot more that needs to go into, well, not needs to, but for it to be a well-rounded rating and for it to be a fair rating, there's a lot more that needs to go into rating a book than just how much did I enjoy the book. One of the things you need to factor in is, well, again, you don't need to, but for me, I love this style, so I'm adopting it. So when I say need to, I mean I need to do, because this is how I'm going to follow that same format. One of the things I need to keep in mind when I'm rating a book is, did it fulfill the purpose of what it was setting out to do? And in this case, I'm referring to the genre of the book. Now, as I did say, The Replacement by Brené Yovanov is a fantasy book. It is a young adult fantasy book. Did it fulfill the requirements to be a young adult fantasy book? In my mind, no. Now, again, I can't stress this enough. Maybe it's just me, but I feel that if someone is going to categorize a book, I feel that for me, I need it to be much more of a specific categorization, and not just, this is a young adult fantasy book, but more that this is a young adult fantasy book that will not have any fantastical elements for the first 100 pages. So, yeah. You know, I would maybe even go as far to say, if you want to keep it short, this is a young adult fantasy / contemporary book, or actually it should be the other way around. This is a young adult contemporary / fantasy book, because I then probably would not have picked the book up because contemporary was mentioned there. But in this case, this book is not at all subcategorized as a contemporary book. It is subcategorized as a fantasy book, a young adult fantasy book. It's not a fantasy as far as I'm concerned. It has fantastical elements from about 2/3 of the way through, and then there is a really epic scene towards the end that is very fantastical, and I really appreciated that, don't get me wrong. But for the majority of the book, it's just not a fantasy book for me. Now, there are arguments that can be made that any book might as well be a fantasy book, because any book that is written by any author, that is a fictional book at least, is their own fantasy world, no matter how contemporary or contemporary / human landia a feel the book may have. It still comes from the author's own world. It's their vision. It's not literally what's happening in physical human landia. But in saying that, if I'm going to go into a book and start reading a book for the fantastical elements, because it is categorized as a fantasy book, if it is not a fantasy book, or if the fantasy in that book is extremely low, low either in the elements of fantasy that are being used, or low in that there is not a lot of fantasy within this book that is categorized as a fantasy, then I do feel not only the need, but absolutely the want as well to mark the book down, because it's not serving its purpose. Its purpose is to be a young adult fantasy book, and I don't think it fulfilled that. Now, there were little moments here and there that did, and so I have to take that into consideration, and that's where my 0.5 comes from. There was some fantasy in the book, so it was half, reached, but it wasn't fully reached, so there we go. Next thing I look at is the writing style. The writing style of Brenna Yovanov is fine. I don't have too many issues with it. I think she is very good at the descriptions that the way that she describes things. Her writing style when it comes to descriptions, anyway, is actually done really well. There are other books that I've read that will spend pages and pages and pages trying to describe one thing, like one red, shining, bouncing ball, and we spend 3 pages trying to reading about the description of this red, shiny, bouncy ball, which I don't need. Brenna Yovanov has just enough description. So if I go to the opposite of the red, shiny ball, let's say we're describing a tree, the description might be there was a lone tree that stood in the forest that had a brown trunk and green leaves. This might not be enough of a description. Brenna Yovanov has found a way to describe things in a way that's just right. It's just enough. It's not so much that it's taking you away from the plot, which other books have done for me in the past. We spend so much time describing something that you're so detracted from what's happening because you're now having to deal with all the descriptions that are going on. That doesn't happen in The Replacement. So I praise her for that. But with the main plot itself, one thing that I did not appreciate is that things jump really quickly in a not so obvious flowing way, and I did not appreciate that. To give you an example, I'm not going to give a direct example from the book, but to give you an example, let's just say that you have a character that is sitting at the table in the kitchen and they have a plan to go to their friend's place, but they're making that plan at the kitchen table. The way that I appreciate reading a book is that you plan to go to your friend's place, you're sitting at the table, you're planning to go to your friend's place, you get up, you walk out the door, you're now walking down the street, and then you end up at your friend's place. But with Brenna Yovanov, what she will do is you're sitting down at the table, planning to go to your friend's place, you're now at your friend's place, and you're knocking on the door, and there's no explanation of how you got there. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a reader that loves reading fast-paced books. Absolutely. But there is a style that I have become accustomed to thanks to Harry Potter. Now, I might grab the book. Just a moment. Now, Harry Potter is actually a little bit different to what I was actually thinking of, but I can talk about that in a moment too. But I know you can't really see this, but I'm trying to show you here that we have a paragraph here, then we have a space there, and then we have a new paragraph here. And so the paragraph here at the top is a bit of dialogue, 2 characters having a bit of a discussion. Then we have a space, then we have the next paragraph, which starts a different thing. It starts somewhere else. So we're going in this case, we're going from a discussion between a couple of characters into the thoughts of the protagonist and a bit more of plot here. Where when it comes to, I'm trying to see if I have it in any of the books that I have on me at the moment, but I don't think I do. Mistborn is a wonderful example of this, and I don't have Mistborn with me in the room right now, and I don't really want to go off and get it, but sometimes what will happen, I do it with my writing, and Brandon Sanderson does it really well in Mistborn, is that if you want to go from being at the kitchen table, determining that you're going to your friend's place, and then suddenly you're at your friend's front door, you will put something in between being at the kitchen table and then getting to the door. If, at the very least, in Harry Potter, there is a space, between that former paragraph and the next one. With Mistborn, there's a symbol. So I can't really describe the symbol, but basically, the paragraph ends, that if you're writing it, you will press enter. So like you're going to create a space and write a new paragraph. Then you center the cursor, press enter again. So you've pressed enter twice. On that second enter, you will put a symbol. Then you will press enter again. Then you would start the next chapter. So you've got paragraph, space, symbol, space, paragraph. And that shows a break between what is going on. I much prefer it to be done that way so that I know we have come to the end of a scene within this chapter. Brenna Yovanov does not do this. Brenna Yovanov will literally write one sentence after the other. I was sitting at the kitchen table planning to go to my friend's place, so I was at my friend's place and I knocked on the door. My problem with this is that way too many times in my mind I'm going, hang on, we were literally just at the kitchen table. How are we now at the friend's front door? When there's no break in the writing, there's nothing suggesting that this works. It just doesn't work for me. Even if it was a high fantasy novel where the character can transport themselves from one place to another, at least that sentence would help me, where it would say, I was sitting at the kitchen table, I wanted to go to my friend's place, so I transported to my friend's place and then I knocked on the door. That makes more sense to me because you are following the character actually doing what they're doing rather than sentence after sentence. And I need to show you with her writing. Yeah, I mean, literally every page, but I'd like to give you a perfect example if I can. All right, this page. Okay, as you can see, there's like a little tiny space here, but it's really, her writing is extremely squished together. It's not set out in spaced paragraphs, although it's really odd though, because I just saw an example of where there is a spaced paragraph, and yet she still will do that. She'll still squish things together when it's the end of one scene, the beginning of another, which doesn't make any sense. I'm just trying to find the example I just saw. I'll be right back. Okay, no, I was actually wrong. It looks like there is a big space that separates paragraphs because the last line of the paragraph might be one or two words, but then she goes directly to the next line. But my point is that she's not going to the next line to begin the next scene. She's going to the next line because, I don't know, because she feels like she wants to. Maybe she rolled a die and just went, okay, it's landed on 5. Let's go to a new paragraph. It's completely random. Where to say I was sitting at the kitchen table and I was sitting at the kitchen table wanting to go to my friend's place. I knocked on the door of my friend's house. They're not in separate paragraphs. They are sentences that are joined together in the same paragraph. And so this has the reader working overtime going, well, hang on. What's going on here? This doesn't make sense to me. You may love that and you may be able to just jump here and there and have no problem with that. But for me, it just doesn't allow the story to flow because you are being jerked out of one scene and placed into another out of nowhere. And it just makes no sense. So I don't like that about her writing style. I love the way she describes things, her descriptions when it comes to her writing, but I do not like the way that she jumps about here and there. That really annoyed me. The next thing I didn't like was the breadcrumbs. Now, okay, this is a personal preference, but I felt that I could not be true to who I am if I were to say, that's okay, she does this and we can all be fine with that, because I went into this book with the genre that it is. It's a young adult fantasy book. It's not a mystery book. It's not a detective book. We're not trying to look for clues throughout the book that will be potential answers towards the end. No, we're not going in doing that. So she mentions little things here and there, and I'm trying to think of examples. Okay, so she mentions that Mackie is a replacement, but and that's mentioned really early on, like in the first chapter. We don't actually find out what a replacement is for another 100 to 150 pages. That is very annoying for me, and I felt that I needed to rate accordingly with that. There are other readers that are very different. They like when an author will write something in a way that has the reader thinking for themselves what something is or what something could be. And I have no problems theorizing if I'm in a book club and I've read a certain amount of chapters and then we start theorizing about it. Oh, the lighting is just changing me. I'm sorry. If I'm in a book club and then we start theorizing about what could potentially, be coming up or what something could mean, that's fine. But when I'm reading the book at that moment in time, I don't want to be sitting there second guessing every little thing that's happening. I want the author to be explaining to me, what they mean. Tell me what you mean. Tell me what's going on. Don't have me in a fantasy novel. Don't have me second guessing everything. Don't have me having to sit there, put the book down, think about what I think and have it go my way just to come back and then maybe have you take a sharp left turn. That's just me. That's my personal opinion, but I didn't like that she put these breadcrumbs in that seemed so meaningless at the time, and then only for them to get wrapped up at the end of the book. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. It is a personal preference, so you may disagree with me, and if you do, that's totally fine. But if I'm going into a fantasy book, I cannot look at it like it's a mystery book. I'm looking at it in the way that I would want to write a fantasy book, which would be, if it makes no sense to put it in at the time, then why are we putting it in at all? And not to put something in on page 20 that you are only going to find out the answer to in page 350. It just doesn't make sense to me. If you're putting something in to page number 20 and it is explained in page 25, I'm good with that. But to wait so long for something that remains so open, it just became a bit of a headache for me to read. Now, let's talk about the good things that I really appreciated about this book. There are fantasy elements in the book, but again, it bears repeating. I don't like that it is categorized as a young adult fantasy book when the fantastical moments in the book are few and far between, that it might as well be called a contemporary fantasy book rather than just a fantasy book. So when we get about 3/4 of the way through, we are introduced to these beings. We're introduced to the Morrigan, we're introduced to the lady, and we're introduced to those who live with each sister. The Morrigan and the lady are sisters. They live separately and they do things very differently. These moments that we share with the Morrigan and that we share with the lady, I very much appreciated, because the fantasy was done really, really well. There were a lot of things explained during scenes with either side that I very much appreciated. One of the things that they discussed is how every so often, and at a particular point, either throughout the year or at the beginning of a season or something along those lines, but at a particular point, there is a sacrifice that needs to be made in the Humanlandia town of Gentry. And the sacrifice needs to occur for the town to receive, let's call them blessings, for the town to thrive the way that it does. Now, the lady, who is, if we're going to compare them, the lady comes off as more of the evil fantastical being, and the Morrigan comes off as more of the good/nice fantastical being. The lady is responsible for sacrificing these humans. And as I said, it's one per however often. I like that it was explained, that the purpose of the sacrifice is explained. It makes sense that they need to be sacrificed in order for them to receive the blessings that they are receiving. I do appreciate that. And Brenda Yovanov does go into enough detail for you to really appreciate why this is going on. It's not like she gives you one or two sentences and then completely moves away from it. There are quite a few pages of detail of why this is happening and from the perspective of a human living in Humanlandia, this may seem totally barbaric, to quote Hermione Granger. It's actually not. It actually does make a lot of sense, and so I appreciate the way that was written. At the same time, what I don't like about Gentry about the Humanlandia side of the book is that these humans that live in this town, they don't know what the sacrifice does. They know that humans get sacrificed. Well, no. They know that humans are killed every so often, but they don't know why. Here's what I don't like about it. They are totally fine with it. They are, if anything, they seem very neutral with it. Oh, someone else has died. Okay, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. If you're going to base something in reality, and I have learnt this from others as well, this is not something that I'm just saying on my own. If you are going to have any contemporary moments within books, anything that is human related, it needs to be shrouded in some form of actual reality. Now, as I said, this is something that is strongly agreed upon within the reading community. If it is human, it needs to be relatable. Fine. For me, I prefer it just to not be human in the first place, but I can understand what they're saying. If I'm reading a human book, I would like it to be relatable. So I get what they're saying. I don't feel that that would be the reality. If there's a town where someone just dies every so often and you don't know why and you're totally fine with it, and this is fine and they're dead, and I hope that those who have lost whoever they lost are okay, but it's normal. I don't understand that. I don't appreciate that at all. And throughout the entire book, as you know, I've read the whole thing now. Throughout the entire book, it is never once explained to the humans why this happens. I feel that if they knew why it happened, that would make more sense. Okay, so we don't necessarily like this because we're humans, we have emotions, we have feelings, we don't like that they're being sacrificed, but at least we know that they're being sacrificed so that the town can actually thrive and receive the blessings that they're receiving. That's just my opinion. So I don't like that. And as far as if you are going to have contemporary elements and how they need to be shrouded in some form of reality, Brenna Yovanov missed the mark on that one as far as I'm concerned, so I had to take off another 0.5 for that rating there. But going back over to the Morrigan doesn't like to sacrifice anyone in as far as how she'll deliver the blessings to the town. For her, it's more of a two-way street. So what she's done is she has set up a band that plays at this club, and it's very interesting how this is done. The band gives the beings that are part of this band give the human audience, it gives them a lot of enjoyment and a lot of fulfillment because the band is really good. Now, they're beings, so it makes sense, but they actually do get a lot out of it. They get a lot of enjoyment, a lot of entertainment. It's wonderful. Yeah, so I get that that's wonderful. At the same time, what works for the Morrigan is that the applause and the appreciation then comes back to the Morrigan and her beings, and that fills them up. And I like that. I think that's a really great way to describe it's a great way to describe a give and take when it comes to needing energy to be able to sustain yourself, but you're not stealing it like the lady does when she sacrifices humans. The Morrigan is more, we will give you entertainment, we will give you pleasure, we'll give you something that you can have enjoyment with. At the same time, we will also be able to use that enjoyment to fulfill us. So it works really well. Again, the humans don't know this, but I don't mind that the humans don't know this because it serves its purpose. The humans do get enjoyment out of it. They really love the band. They appreciate it. They enjoy it. So I don't see why they need to know that one. Where with the lady and the lady's sacrifices, I do feel that that should have been explained to the humans. I think it would have created a much better element and it would have been much more shrouded in reality. Where if we look at the reality of humans these days, if they see a band that they love, appreciate and enjoy, they don't need to have it explained to them why they love, appreciate and enjoy it. But when people die, there is a commonality that humans want to know why they died, even if it comes from an emotional place. Why did you have to take this one? Why did they have to die? There's a lot of questions. But in Gentry, no one cares. It's completely, as I said, it's viewed as completely it's viewed completely neutrally. So, you know, makes me wonder. Right at the conclusion of the story, I think it's either the second last or the last chapter, because some of the chapters are really short and some of them are long. So it's either the second last or the last chapter. There is a big battle. The big climax occurs. And the main character, who is, get this, half alive, half dead, okay? And you don't learn that for about 150 pages, even though you know he's a replacement on page 3. And then it takes 150 pages to work out what that means. But anyway, he ends up having a battle with the lady because he doesn't agree that she's sacrificing everyone, and the latest human to be sacrificed is a love interest of the main character, who is a human, and so he wants to help her. Basically, that's the deal. So he tries to battle with her, and that doesn't work because she outsmarts him so easily. But ultimately, they come together for the sacrifice of this main character's love interest's sister, and the main character says, and this is the big moment, oh, you know what? Maybe if you need to sacrifice someone, don't sacrifice her, sacrifice me instead. Hence, the replacement. He's replacing her. Just a moment. So he goes to the lady and she takes him away, and then she bites into his arm and starts drinking his blood. Now, hold the phone, because we have never been told, nor has it even been subtly referred to, that this woman is a vampire. And also in that climactic moment, it is also not referred to the fact that she is a vampire. So I cannot tell you if she is a vampire and she has fangs and she's drinking the blood of him because that's what sustains her, or if she's just doing this because this is how she kills people and she's just, I don't know, for a completely different being and a completely different reason. I can't tell you. It's not well explained. However, it gets to a point where he is able to take advantage of the fact that he is half dead and half alive, because once she's sucked out enough blood, he doesn't really let anything else affect him, and then he ends up, well, it ends up being rather anticlimactic, in fact. He ends up reaching into his pocket where he has, I think it's like a screwdriver or something, and he stabs her with it, and then she slowly dies. Let's, hark back to referencing The Wizard of Oz. I'm melting! She slowly dies. And we find out in the end that the lady is actually a representative of fear, while the Morrigan is a representative of love or hope or something like that. All in all, I did not appreciate this book. I did not like this book, but the fantastical elements were done well and the description was done well. 2.5 stars for this one. If you would like to pick it up, it is called The Replacement by Brenna Yovanov. I hope you enjoyed my review of this book. If you'd like to leave any comments, thoughts, and or questions below, please do so. But in the meantime, I'm letting you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love, and I'll see you in my next review. Mwah. Bye guys. Bye.